You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Rea. Let's get into the show.
So welcome to actually quite an exciting episode of Idea Collider for me. As Michelle and I worked together a ways back, but always admired her kind of leadership, and I'm kind of keen to get into Alltrna, your current company, Michelle, and maybe if you could start by telling us who you are and what you do at Alltrna.
So, Mike, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this podcast. It's great to reconnect after so many years. So I am the CEO of Alltrna, which is a flagship pioneering that is very much focused on unlocking the biology of tRNA, transfer RNA, to address a host of rare genetic diseases in a way that no other genetic modality can. We can certainly get into that in a bit more detail later on if you'd like. But of course, as my job as CEO of a preclinical stage company, soon to be clinical stage, for the 4 years that I've been here, it's been very much about really understanding the platform, the technology, trying to tease out assets that can be developed from this platform, and really try to advance with my team the assets towards the clinic so that we can really develop the proof of concept that this is a brand new modality that could have a meaningful impact for patients. So a lot of that comes with building an organization, hiring amazing people to really do this alongside with me, of course, to create opportunities for the capital to be invested in the organization and to allocate that capital appropriately so we can really achieve our mission. So that's a lot of what I do, Mike.
Fantastic. Well, we first met in large pharma, and your kind of career arc has been, I think you started in R&D and then a lot of commercial roles. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the kind of through line in your career from that time?
Yeah, so I entered into the drug development business first in R&D and then in commercial, as you said, really because of a very early and transformative experience that I had in my life where I was working in a cancer clinic, actually up here in Boston at the Beth Israel Deaconess Clinical Trials Center. And my role there was really to work with sponsors as well as cooperative groups who were running clinical trials and being the liaison between those groups as well as the investigators that were running the studies at the clinics. And I'd say very importantly, the patients who were participating in those clinical programs. It was in that experience really partnering with patients who were really at some of their scariest times in their life, who were really trying to dedicate themselves to advancing science in a robust way, but then also with a grain of hope and optimism for new approaches or new innovations that might actually be fundamentally different from what the toolkit was available to treat different types of cancers. Meeting some of those patients, and in particular one patient, really inspired me to really recognize that there is so much work that we need to do. Now, keep in mind, Mike, this was well over 2 decades ago. This was in I'm going to call it the 90s, 1990s. And really what we had available to us was chemotherapy singles or doublets. That was pretty much it. And so patients, unfortunately, there was so much unmet medical need, the long-term survival rates desperately low, and some patients really touched me dramatically to really realize that we've got to do better here at bringing innovations forward to patients. And that's really what inspired me to enter into, well, first a small biotech and then the pharmaceutical sector, first in R&D and then in commercial, as you mentioned, to really try to make a difference and to figure out opportunities to bring better medicines to patients faster. And then also ultimately really trying to find opportunities as well for where commercial and R&D could work much more closely together in the life cycle of a product. Because that to me felt like a better strategy to move at a pace and to bring the best innovations possible to patients. So the red thread for me in all aspects of my career has really been this very deep sort of patient centricity and really this desire to have a meaningful impact on people who really need that. That was very true at the beginning of my career, where I lived and breathed oncology through many different roles that I had in big pharma earlier on in my career. And it's definitely true to this day in my role at Alltrna, which is not focused on oncology, but focused on rare diseases. But again, is a place where I think there's a huge opportunity to have a meaningful impact on patients. And quite frankly, feels like where we were in oncology maybe 20 years ago. Like the innovation is possible, but these are populations that are really still greatly underserved and overlooked, and we need to address that.
Yeah. So that's an interesting kind of story about almost designing your insights back into the clinical program. So designing with the end in mind, those kind of stories of unmet need in the oncology space. So is that the kind of thing that you mean, that kind of insights from patients and the desire to do better?
That's exactly right. So, I mean, those insights, the importance of really like deeply listening and understanding their lived experiences, bringing that into the work that we do every single day, and really ultimately working towards making an impact. And that could be in new innovations. It could be in the way that we sort of tackle some of the key challenges in their life, of which in therapeutics is a component, but not the whole component. Yeah. So all of that is super important for what I do every day.
Yeah. Well, I want to come to the kind of the role of being a CEO in a biotech. You mentioned that your true self is showing up to work in this new role. So can you contrast large pharma, Michelle, from biotech CEO, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, so what I would say is I had an amazing upbringing, I'll call it, in big pharma, where I spent 20 years or so. Great experiences and opportunities to live in different countries, geographies, doing different types of roles and functions. And yeah, as I mentioned, mostly in the oncology space. I definitely feel like earlier in my career, and this is probably true for many people, as we're given feedback, as we're being coached by our managers, our mentors, people in our lives, I felt like my job in the early stage of my career, listening and internalizing that feedback, was really to try to, I'd say, be inspired by other great leaders that were in my world and to work and behave more like them. And that actually was fine and did well for me earlier on in my career. But I had this kind of like aha moment that the more and more I tried to be like somebody else, I actually felt like I was less clear about who I was personally. And to me, it sort of felt like I've spent a bunch of my career really trying to mirror what other individuals were doing, because that seemed to be like the ticket to different opportunities and different advancements and maybe some promotions. And really what I realized is I actually feel like I didn't know how to be my best self. I was learning how to be somebody else's best self. And then I learned to take some of that feedback and then internalize it in a way that said, how can Michelle be her best self? And so instead of expending all of this energy trying to act and behave like somebody else, I actually spent all of that energy and said, how do I act and behave like the best version that Michelle can be? And not worry so much about whether or not looks identical to another individual that I admired. And so that to me, I felt like really gave me license and the freedom to be truly authentic, maybe for the first time in my career. And that was actually quite liberating. And it didn't really happen until halfway through or so my tenure in large pharma. But once I started to get comfortable with that and comfortable with myself and who the best version of myself was, I actually felt like it really unleashed this person and this leader inside of me that is who I am today, which is a very authentic, very transparent, very real and down to earth, very passion driven, patient driven, but also performance driven type person. And I think me being myself also creates opportunity for the people around me to also be more comfortable being themselves too. And I think that's how we get the best of everybody around the table and the best ideas around the table. So for me, it's really worked out incredibly well.
Fantastic. Well, and you mentioned this kind of team that you've assembled around you. What kind of examples would you give of how your best self shows up with the people around you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say honestly, a lot of it is about being very vulnerable.
Mhm.
talking about the things that I'm excited about, talking about the things that keep me up at night or that make me nervous or scare me. And to me, I feel like when we can be vulnerable and we can talk about the difficult things, it really creates an environment where there's psychological safety for everybody to do the same and to be the same. What that means, I think, from a person perspective or a leader perspective is that, as I mentioned before, Mike, it's about like people feeling really comfortable talking about the difficult things and embracing that there are whole people that show up to these jobs every day, you, me, everybody around me, and to really factor in the whole person in the work that we do. But I'd say also very importantly, from a company perspective, it also means that we talk about the challenges and the risks in a way that we don't have to be scared of them, but that we can mitigate for them, right? And allowing us to put the best thinking on the table because we create opportunities, even when it means maybe disagreeing with the entire bunch. It creates an environment where people can disagree, where people are asked to disagree, because that helps us make sure that we're making the best decisions for the company, for the technology, for the patients that we can.
No, that's impressive. I think that I've written before about how vulnerability in the team is a real strength when people admit what they don't know, at least as much as what they do, because they might find that someone else on the team does know something about the thing that you didn't expect them to. And that kind of shared experience can't happen without that kind of that degree of uncertainty and emotional connection to your team members.
Completely agree.
And I wanted to talk, because I know, a lot of people in biotech talk about patient impact. You've kind of publicly shared about your son's diagnosis. Can you share more about that and about how that moment shifted your perspective on what good looks like for drug development?
Sure. So yes, I have 3 children, and one of them, my middle child, who's now 15. But back in May of 2020, when all of us were locking down in kind of COVID, wherever we were, he was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And maybe just briefly for audience members who may not be as familiar with Duchenne, this is a rare genetic muscle wasting disease that, kids are born with it. It generally affects most only males, but that's not entirely true. There are some cases where females are diagnosed, but most frequently it's males. And it's a muscle wasting condition whereby over the course of time, without dystrophin, the ability to ambulate, to walk, to do physical activities gets harder, and then over time, and then becomes not possible. But because muscles are so prevalent and dystrophin plays a role in every single muscle structure, it's not just skeletal muscle, it's also the diaphragm, so affecting breathing. It's also cardiac, so affecting our hearts to beat. It has a truncated life expectancy. Historically, typically young men would die from this condition somewhere in their mid-20s. Now we're getting to about the mid-30s with some advancements, but it's still an incurable disease. Even with a lot of innovation that has been advanced over the course of the last decade, still incurable disease. So quite a lot of work that needs to be done still. So my son's diagnosis in May of 2020, and again, having a big career in oncology and being in an oncology specific role at the time of his diagnosis, really opened my eyes up to another side of the industry and the unmet need that I really wasn't paying attention to. Of course, as Mike, having spent a lot of time in this space, there's been tremendous unmet medical need in oncology, and there still is today. But when we look at the last 20 years, we've made huge amounts of progress from like those chemotherapy regimens that I mentioned earlier to now having targeted therapies, immunotherapies, antibody drug conjugates, like all kinds of advancements that are really making a big difference for patients. And when my son was diagnosed, it really cast this light on a huge population that was severely overlooked. And part of the problem with that is because there are so many different rare genetic diseases. There are somewhere around 10,000 of them.
Yeah.
If we think about the overall prevalence of rare diseases, there's somewhere around, it's 1 in 10 people have a rare condition, That's about 300 or 400 million people worldwide. And so if I equate this back to oncology, which I think is kind of an interesting comparison, there are 35 million new cancer cases that are projected by 2050. So that's about 10% of that rare disease population that I mentioned. Now, it's still a big number, but still shies in comparison, right, to rare diseases. So it really puts that kind of into perspective. So a huge population. And right now, with all of the modern technologies that we're advancing as an industry, gene therapy, gene editing, siRNAs, mRNAs, all of these different approaches, antisense, let's say, strategies, all of them are addressing one disease at a time. Now, there's 10,000 of these different conditions. So when you think about it, with that type of formula, we, of course, as a field, if we can only tackle one disease at a time, we're going to focus on the most prevalent and the most common of those rare diseases. It makes financial sense. I say that from a commercial perspective, having been in this industry. But the question is, does it really make patient sense? Because there are so many patients, of course, then that will never see an innovation because they're one of the 95% of disease. They might have one of these 95% of diseases that don't have an FDA-approved therapy. So it's really about thinking differently about this challenge. But his diagnosis, my son Caffrey's diagnosis, really then inspired me to think very differently about what I wanted to do with my career. And I loved my time in oncology, but I felt like with all of these years of knowledge that I built up in drug development and helping to ensure that you pave the pathway so that innovations can get into the hands of patients in a meaningful way, how could I do that for rare diseases and hope to, if I do this for another 20 years, have just as much impact in rare diseases as the small impact that I've had in oncology. And I'd love to see that we can look back 20 years from now and feel like we've made a big difference. And that's what inspired me to come to Alltrna.
Well, I want to take a sidestep because I know you're involved with a group called Rare Disease Renegades. You talk a little bit more about what they do and what they aim to achieve and how that fits in.
Yeah, so Rare Disease Renegades is the nonprofit that my family founded when Caffrey was diagnosed in 2020, because part of us really becoming now embedded in members of the rare disease community ourselves, we realized that there is probably work that we can do to bring both financing as well as innovation and to help advance those forwards in a number of different ways. It's very different than the work that I do at Alltrna, which is very specific and kind of advancing one modality. Rare Disease Renegades is looking across the board at different types of approaches, novel approaches, and really trying to identify what some of those exciting advancements, technologies can be of the future and figure out opportunities, whether it's about providing some capital to advance them or even the right connections to really help move those technologies forward in a way that could be faster than if they could do it alone. And that's the work that we do at Rare Disease Renegades.
Fantastic. And then I'll take a step forwards towards, because Flagship's an interesting company, right? An interesting group of companies. Unique model, I think, for companies that around breakthrough platforms. What took you to Flagship and kind of the kind of creation of Alltrna or the role of CEO?
Yeah, so Alltrna is a flagship pioneering company. I like to describe flagship pioneering as a venture creation firm, which is a very simplified version of what it actually does, but I think that's kind of a general way for the audience to interpret. Alltrna was actually founded before I joined the company. So it was founded in 2018. I came in 2022. What's really exciting about so first and foremost, I came to Alltrna really because of the technology. What we're doing at Alltrna is really engineering these transfer RNAs, tRNAs, which play a hugely important role in the protein translation process, whereby a single engineered tRNA may be able to address patients not with one disease, but hundreds, maybe even thousands of different diseases. So when I first heard about that technology or that kind of idea, it was this profound kind of light bulb moment where I was like, oh, okay, well, we've been tackling things one at a time, and maybe now we can tackle many diseases at a time. That sounded like it could have a profoundly transformative impact on the rare disease community. So I was extraordinarily excited about the technology and actually the founding scientific team from Flagship, who who founded the company and advanced the technology up until that point. But then as I dug into Flagship pioneering itself, because of course these come hand in hand, it's not just about coming to Alltrna. I'm also a CEO partner at Flagship Pioneering. So I have two hats really that I wear. And Flagship Pioneering feels like a very unique model whereby you're part of an ecosystem is how I would describe it. So you're not just the CEO of a company in the biotech industry. You're the CEO of a biotech company in an ecosystem of biotech companies, as well as kind of this umbrella organization that has a wealth of expertise, whether that expertise is in capital formation or in drug development or in organizational development. People who are at Flagship have had so many different experiences and are really have decades and decades of things that they've gone through. So for me, when I was thinking about the opportunity to come into a CEO role for the very first time, I mean, this is not something I've done before. I felt like doing it in the context of the Flagship ecosystem felt like a really great thing to do. Because if I was struggling with something or coming across a challenge, I knew that there were people that I could tap into who have likely been through something before, who could help me navigate the steps that are necessary in order to be able to figure out how to get from point A to point B in the best way possible. And I loved the idea of being part of something bigger. Now, a CEO job in general can be an extraordinarily lonely job. I actually felt that to a certain degree when I was country president of a cluster of markets at AstraZeneca, where when you're sitting at the top and you've got to kind of shoulder a lot of burden and responsibility for your organization, you're kind of like the only person sometimes that needs to make a decision. And that is a lot, very similar to being in a CEO role. But being part of the ecosystem makes me feel like, yes, of course, you might be on the hook for making a decision, but you can do it, knowing that you can tap into a lot of different perspectives that can help you make the best informed decision possible when you have to. So I love that model.
Yeah. Could you imagine being a first-time CEO without that kind of group around you?
I mean, lots of people do it, I know, and kudos to them. But it wasn't for me, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Just going to go back to tRNA. So, I mean, that potential to transform things, as you say, into multiple diseases. Can you give us a bit more about why it's different from other genetic medicine approaches?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, all other genetic approaches are targeting either a specific gene or a specific protein, or in some cases, especially when it comes to gene editing, a specific gene and a specific mutation, and even a specific location for where those mutations occur, so that you can get the precise edit at that one spot. What that really means is then you're focusing on one disease at a time or one subpopulation of one disease at a time. And again, as we talked about, when you've got 10,000 different diseases, that means that we're really only going to focus on the most common. And especially if you're a patient that has an ultra rare disease, the likelihood that you'd ever see an innovation in your lifetime is unfortunately extremely grim. So with the tRNA, actually, because of its role in the protein translation process, and maybe just the kind of quick bio 101 is the tRNA actually reads the codon in the mRNA strand for each and every amino acid that makes up the proteins that, of course, are critical for all life's functions. And what it does is it reads the 3-letter code, it understands which amino acid is being coded for, it finds that surrounding amino acid in the surrounding cellular environment, and then transfers that corresponding amino acid to the growing protein chain. So you clearly need these tRNAs in order for proteins to come about. Now, when there are different types of mutations, of course, these codes for the amino acids are not precisely correct, and that's what causes these genetic diseases at the end of the day. There are many different or several different types of mutations, missense, frameshift, nonsense mutations. Where we are starting at Alltrna is nonsense mutations. This is when you have a code for one of these amino acids, codes for a stop instead. And so what happens in this translation process is that when you see this early stop signal, that's exactly what happens. There are no tRNAs that know how to read the stop other than a stop signal. So translation stops too early and you've got a shortened protein or actually an absent protein, and that's what causes disease.
Mhm.
Now, of all genetic diagnoses, about 10% of those genetic diagnoses stem from one of these premature termination codons. We actually would call that population as having Stop-Codon disease. And the prevalence of Stop-Codon disease in the context of all genetic diseases is around 35 million people. So maybe just going back to that oncology example, 35 million new cancer cases by 2050. Here we have 35 million people today have Stop-Codon disease. So a huge population. It's definitely not rare. Now, what's really unique about the tRNA is that it actually does that same job that I described, regardless of which gene is involved, regardless of which protein is being encoded for. And it does the same job kind of no matter where these mutations occur in the coding sequence. And a tRNA doesn't specifically target a gene or a protein.
Mhm.
What it targets is the mutation that is common across many different diseases. So I said that we're in the first instance targeting these nonsense mutations. The exact same nonsense mutation occurs in somewhere around 4,000 different diseases. So think about that, right? So instead of one drug, one disease, which is how it is for every other modality, this could be one engineered tRNA targeting the same mutation across potentially thousands of different diseases. So what does that mean from a human impact is that perhaps potentially patients that might have one of many thousands of different life-threatening conditions may actually be addressed with a single engineered tRNA,
Mhm.
which to me is super cool, but also extremely important and could perhaps be very transformative. That also means, as I mentioned, those patients that might have one of these ultra-rare or nano-rare diagnoses that might never get one of these other strategies kind of specifically developed for them may be able to benefit from a tRNA because we can address the same genetic drivers across different diseases.
Mm.
Now, maybe just coming back to oncology again for a second, and I know this is a space that you and I started working together on many moons ago. This is also how the advancement of innovations in oncology sort of evolved over the course of time when we started to really understand the genetic drivers behind many cancers. And in doing so and really understanding those drivers, that led to the opportunity for targeted therapies
Yeah.
to come about for these different cancer types. And of course, also the way that we sometimes develop these cancer drugs in basket trials.
Yeah.
So technically where you have patients with different cancer diagnoses, but they all have the same genetic driver, whether it's an EGFR or something else, they all come into one clinical trial. They get that one targeted therapy specifically for that type of mutation. And then we look at the outcomes across all of those different populations. We actually believe we can do the same thing with a tRNA, leverage the same type of development strategy with a basket trial, patients across different rare genetic diseases, but all have the same nonsense mutation. They would all get the same engineered tRNA. And that really effectively means that a lot of the patients that we might be including in our basket trial may not be eligible for any other clinical trial because there's no innovations specific for them. So I think that's a really important way to think about completely changing the paradigm that we not only develop these drugs, but actually ultimately treat these patients and maybe classify these patients moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. That was literally the question I was going to ask you was, I mean, you're changing an ecosystem as much as as a treatment paradigm. How does it affect your clinical development and maybe commercial approach if you can't move sequentially in some of those cases and you can't launch 100 different indications at the moment? How are you thinking about redefining some of that space?
Well, I mean, I think this is exactly one of the reasons why in rare diseases, just we've had so few innovations because we are sort of hamstrung by the necessity to go one disease at a time. And of course, drug development is expensive and you need the patients necessary in order to be able to generate the data that is required to demonstrate the risk-benefit profile of these innovations. I mean, it is tough work. And so a very focused approach is really how historically it has been done. So I definitely think that this different way of thinking about development would allow us to be able to, like I would describe it, prosecute many different diseases simultaneously, which is a much more efficient way of advancing innovation. It's a much more efficient way of applying capital across different innovations. Because ultimately, what it might mean is that we could launch, or very soon after launch, get a disease agnostic but mutation specific type indication, which would mean we wouldn't necessarily have to be isolated to having only one patient population, but we might be able to have a commercial opportunity that captures many different patient populations, which I think is really great. So the business opportunity makes sense. And deploying the capital in an efficient way that allows us to be able to tackle many diseases at a time is relatively novel in rare diseases, but there's precedence for it. And I think that's a really exciting way for us to really accelerate the way that we bring new innovations for rare disease. And I hope we see more of that.
And you tie that to, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation around changes at the FDA and other things that sound like they're moving towards where you are instead of the other way around. Do you get that sense of opportunity there?
Well, I hope so, right? I definitely believe that the things that we're hearing from the most senior leaders at FDA make a lot of sense for the types of technologies that we have. I mean, especially there's this emerging guidance that's forthcoming around plausible mechanisms and being able to address diseases based on plausible mechanisms. I actually feel like a tRNA strategy is uniquely suited to bring that idea forward, keeping in mind the biology behind these diseases is super, super highly conserved. These mutations have been the same for eons and eons, like a long time. So the mechanism is very well characterized and understood. The same is actually true for a tRNA. A tRNA exists in nature, right? And we're engineering a synthetic version of it that can do the job that right now natural tRNAs don't know how to. But it's the exact same structure, right? These are the exact same tRNAs that are in your body and my body today. So the biology of the modality is also highly conserved, right? tRNAs have been around in protein translation, again, also for eons. So to me, the plausible mechanism is true both from a biology perspective as well as from a modality perspective, which I think is a great way to really demonstrate what plausible mechanism can do. So I'm looking forward to seeing some further information and color around what that guidance could look like. But I definitely think a lot of the things that we're hearing from leadership these days is geared towards trying to advance these types of technologies in novel ways. And I'm excited about that.
Yeah. And maybe also bridging across to, you mentioned gene editing, gene therapy, movements forward in innovation and things like manufacturing and other things. Are they enabling a company like Alltrna to progress?
Yes, 100%. I mean, the way that I sort of describe this is we at Alltrna stand on the shoulders of giants who have been in the RNA field for a decade or so, right before us, where they figured out the ways to manufacture oligonucleotides to really scale them in a way that is meaningful for both clinical programs as well as commercial programs. And we've taken a lot of lessons from that. So we haven't started from scratch everywhere in our company. We've learned a lot from mRNAs. We've learned a lot from siRNAs. And we, of course, had to do some sort of bespoke specific things for tRNAs. But we can focus on the things that are different, but then also leverage the things that are exactly the same and not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned moving to clinical stages earlier in the conversation. Can you give us some examples of some milestones maybe 26 has ahead?
Yeah, so AP003 is our most advanced engineered tRNA. It's targeting the arginine to TGA stop mutation, which is the most common stop mutation. And it's formulated in a lipid nanoparticle. And lipid nanoparticles are very good at getting to the liver and hepatocytes specifically. So our first program will be targeting rare genetic liver diseases. We are at the very final stages of the IND enabling work. 2026 is the year that we will be entering into the clinic. I do believe that Alltrna will be the first company to put a TR, or I'd say an engineered tRNA into humans. So it's a really exciting time for us. And it's a really exciting time for the modality to really demonstrate what we've seen preclinically can translate clinically, and to really also demonstrate what the safety profile in humans looks like, because all of that is going to be really important for what we're able to do with this brand new modality moving forwards. And so I'm really excited about that. We can't talk specifically today about the exact timing of that, but it's going to be soon this year. And watch this space, Mike. I look forward to keeping you updated.
And if everything goes well, what kind of timeline are we looking at for getting these things to patients and into the market?
I mean, yeah, it's a little bit hard to say right now, but certainly, I mean, drug development isn't something that happens overnight. It's still going to be a few years before any tRNA is commercially available. But depending on how things go in the phase 1 initial clinical program, as well as changes that may be happening at the regulatory level, I mean, you never know. Like, I hope that there are ways in which that we can accelerate these. I mean, I do think that the accelerated approval pathways certainly would be a very reasonable strategy for these technologies.
Yeah, and your goal for Alltrna, is it stay independent to go through launch yourself, or do you see Big Pharma having a role to play too?
I mean, to be honest with you, I think anybody would be a fool to say it's going to be this way or the highway in this day and age. I think that right now what we're doing is like doing the best for the technology and the company, and of course the patients as well. I think that might mean a partnering strategy may make sense if it allows us to be able to go faster, further. I definitely believe in the concept of teamwork makes the dream work. And so there may be very many different versions in which this technology can be successful. And we're open and exploring all of them. But right now, we are very focused on entering into the clinic this year, which we intend to do directly ourselves at Alltrna. And then let's see where life takes us in the next few years.
Okay, let's think about maybe tonight or tomorrow night. What keeps you up at night thinking about how to change things for the better?
I have the sort of privilege and maybe arguably the burden of waking up every morning and having a constant reminder of what
Mhm.
is truly at stake
Yep.
and important. And seeing my son and the challenges that he has with his rare diagnoses, it also is a constant reminder of the opportunity that we have in front of us to really make a difference for these patients. I'm super excited about the transformative potential of tRNAs, but I also sort of recognize that this is one strategy amongst many that could make a big difference for families just like mine. There is a sense of urgency to doing what it is that we do. Every day matters, every experiment matters, every patient matters, and really maximizing all of it. Like, that to me is what it is at the end of the day that keeps me going. And when I wake up every day, I face the day with that perspective in mind.
I've enjoyed listening to you because there's this sort of sense of there's real diversity around biotech CEOs at the moment that probably wasn't true of large pharma. You mentioned this kind of trending to be somebody else, and there was that kind of model of large pharma. Do you think that kind of diversity is what we needed and what we've needed for a while?
I mean, I definitely think diversity plays a really important role, kind of coming back even just to the way that I lead. There is no one right way to do something. There is no one answer for anything. Diversity is the way that we make sure that we have all the options put in front of us, and so that we can make the best of them. So, I mean, this is how I lead as a CEO. I know that you could be a successful CEO in a successful company with a different phenotype too, but this is the one that feels comfortable for me. And fortunately, for the last 4 years, I think it's really been value add to the technology and the organization.
Yeah, phenomenal. Well, look, Michelle, I wish we had all the time in the world because there's so many avenues I want to go down. Can people follow you anywhere, or how can people keep up to date with Alltrna?
Sure. I mean, certainly on LinkedIn, you can follow me, you can follow Alltrna. I think if you go to the Alltrna website, there's also opportunity to put your email address and to stay in touch. So I think any one of those channels is a good way for you to keep posted on the great work that we're doing here.
Phenomenal. Well, it's been eye-opening. I think and clearly there's challenges and responsibility that lie ahead with this kind of new approach, but I think we'll all be hoping that you succeed this year and beyond. So, Michelle, I've truly enjoyed having you on as a guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's been great. And maybe just one key takeaway, if that's okay for
Please.
us.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of going back to this comparison to oncology, I'd like to maybe ask the audience, which is something I ask myself and ask you, Mike, is whether or not this is the time for rare diseases, like the same inflection point that we saw in oncology maybe 20 years ago. Is this now maybe the inflection point in rare genetic diseases? And maybe the way that we think about drug development, maybe the way that we think about the infrastructure needed in order to be able to support this inflection point, maybe rather than focusing around disease-specific approaches, that these shared biology may be the best way to serve patients. I think that's a good thing for all of us to really noodle on and maybe work towards as an industry.
It's a phenomenal question. I think I put some cartoons out about, because there was this wave of rare disease companies, right, where you just wonder, everyone was a rare disease company at one point. Novartis, everyone wanted to be a rare disease company. And then the reality hit them about the kind of commercial potential of some of those rare diseases was more of an issue. But you've got a different approach to that, right? These rare diseases are not rare if you redefine them. And that, as you say, if the regulators and kind of payers can keep up with that approach, you start to think about this. These are not rare diseases anymore. So it's kind of a interesting reframing of the challenge.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much for having me, Mike. It's been great chatting with you.
I've loved it. Thank you so much, Michelle.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.